All right, so this afternoon we are joined by Mr. David Ellison, candidate for Senate District 32. Mr. Ellison, you're down in Berkeley, Florence, Georgetown, Horry, and Williamsburg County. So it's like you're running for senator for the entire state with that many counties to cover. But
sometimes it feels like it.
I believe it. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, we want to start by getting to know you a little bit better. So if you would, tell us a little bit about how your personal and professional background have shaped your views on why education is important in South Carolina.
Well, first of all, education is the key to everything. You know, the Latin / Greek word education means to bring forth. You know, we have a duty, and parents have a duty, and in many ways, the state has a duty to facilitate the bringing forth of information and the creative talents of our children, especially K through 12. And so when you talk about jobs, when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about roads, when you talk about all these issues that people want to talk about in the political arena, you can boil it down to one word: education. Because I don't know how many times I've talked to business owners and industry leaders, and I'll say, well, why don't you come into Georgetown County? Why don't you come into Williamsburg County? Why don't you come into all these, depressed areas? And what's the first thing they tell me? Education. Right. We cannot bring an industry into a particular area unless we have quality schools. It's not just, it's not just, I say just, that's probably a poor choice. It's not just making sure we have qualified workers, K through 12, and then hopefully they'll go get some either trade school or four-year college. But it's the fact that we can't attract families to these areas to work in these areas without quality education. So I would respectfully, disagree with anybody that says education is not at least in the top one or two issues going forward.
Well, so our members, teachers, would agree with you completely on that. But one big challenge we're facing in South Carolina schools is a teaching shortage crisis.
Right.
Last year, Sarah reported over 6,500 teachers left the classroom. Schools opened the year with over 550 teaching vacancies, and that has some severe negative impact on our kids. So as a member of the General Assembly, what would you see as steps that need to be taken to try to recruit and retain the best teachers to our schools?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Now, you gotta understand my background. I'm a father of four, military retiree, Air Force retired lieutenant colonel. My kids have been in private schools. They've been in government-run schools. They've been in Department of DOD schools in Europe. They've been homeschooled. And so I have a very holistic approach to education. I think it's quite honestly wrong to look at education just from a public school / government school standpoint. That is totally, it's totally narrow-minded, and it's very narrowly focused. We need to look at education in the state of South Carolina to focus on all God's children. As a Christian, I know that kids are made in the image of God. I know that there's one race, it's called the human race. But to focus just on government school, public school teachers is wrong. Point out, and I know that's not, most politicians wouldn't say that talking to a teachers association. And, really it acts more like a teachers union, right?
No, we are not a union.
We don't have unions in teachers unions, but we do have superintendent unions, right? A teacher told me that one time.
The superintendents have an association, but I'm not aware of them having a union.
But this is a side point. When teachers walk off the job, and that's, again, not politically up to say, but they walk off the job and they go to Columbia to march and protest, that's more like a union, correct?
That would be a tactic usually used by unions. Our association was not an organizer of that event.
I understand, but I'm just saying, when a parent sees the teachers are out of the classroom and the classroom is closed, that you got to understand from a parent perspective. But, I have a young 16-year-old that's in, Georgetown County school system right now, virtual. So if a teacher said, hey, we're just going to walk off the job and go to Columbia for the day or 2 days, that to me is a union. So I just bring that out as a point of clarification. But the bigger issues, yes, teacher pay, teacher shortage, they're connected, right? And so the bigger issue is I'm interested in all teachers' pay, just like I'm interested in all God's children. And so I'm interested in private school teachers making more money. I'm interested in tutors making more money. I'm interested in giving homeschool parents some of their taxpayer money back. And so because everybody that's a property owner pays property tax, correct? So it's really, so I think we as adults in the room have to get past this notion that the only way to educate a child is in the K through 12 government school system. That's old school. That's Democrat, okay? That's the difference between my opponent and myself. And just, you know, not to sound political, but I am a politician, right? So, I mean, I don't say that term lightly because I don't feel like a politician. I'm a first-time politician, how about that? But the point is, when we look at education, there's a limited number of resources. And so we have to make sure that our teachers are taken care of, yes. But we also have to make sure that somebody's looking out for the best interest of the children. And I think that's what's been missing in this dialogue, in this discussion. We have teachers associated, love you guys. My wife's a school teacher. She's a College of Charleston graduate, elementary school teacher, homeschool mom now, and, you know, the hardest working woman I know of. And so the point, I think we have to kind of, especially with the COVID, with the China Wuhan virus, there's a lot of issues out there about some teachers saying, well, I don't want to go in the classroom because I'm concerned I'm going to get sick. Okay, that's a legitimate concern. Nobody's, I'm certainly not poo-pooing that. I think, but we also got to look at kids, especially young kids. The data shows, and again, going back to the Republican Party versus Democrat Party, we're the party of science. We're the party that looks at the data. Very rarely do K through 12 kids get severely ill. In fact, it's just the opposite. More kids have died from the flu than the coronavirus. Now, you can't say that about older adults in America, in South Carolina. More older adults have died from the coronavirus. But nobody wants to talk about the science. The other thing is just competition. Making sure that we have competition. I'm a proponent. Again, it's a four-letter word. I don't like to say voucher. I'm a proponent of a GI Bill for kids. As a military guy, that's what I call it. And so if we need to attract better, teachers in the classroom, which we do, I think the best way to do it is look at it like a business. If you want to attract quality talent to your industry, what do? Well, you obviously got to start with pay, but also you got to create a work environment that people want to be in, correct? If you take an average teacher and you say, what are your biggest challenges? I can guarantee you, because I know my wife's told me, in the top 2 or 3 of the challenges are going to be, I don't like my work environment because I have a disruptive child. Okay, most teachers in their career will have at least one. Most teachers, they've had multiple disruptive children. So why, it seems to me, your organization would be advocating vociferously for more options, more choices for parents that have kids. And I hate to use the word disruptive, but I can't think of a better word. Kids that are acting out, kids that might have learning disabilities, kids that might not be learning how to read on grade level. So a kid, and you know what? I was one of those kids. I remember acting out in grade school. And, I was a late bloomer. And so the point that I'm making is, why wouldn't your great organization, Palmetto, help me out, help a brother out. Palmetto Teachers Association, right? And why wouldn't y'all encourage choice? Because I call it educational freedom. Because what that does is, if you have a teacher who says, yeah, listen, let's be honest. There's some teachers that dread coming to school every day. I guarantee you that's the case. And the reason why is they don't feel like they're A, getting the support from their leadership, B, they don't feel like they're making enough money, and C, they've got a disruptive environment. So if you have, we can easily solve today the disruptive environment issue. We can almost solve that overnight. I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but it's true. If a teacher has a parent-teacher meeting with a parent of a disruptive child, and it's the 3rd or 2nd or 4th meeting, and that teacher has the authority, that principal has, they, sir, ma'am, we love your child, we think the world of your child. Your child is made in God's image, but your child, obviously, this is not a good fit for your child. So we're going to send your child, or we're encouraging you to take your education savings account, your GI Bill for kids, your voucher, your tax credit, go on down the street to Patrick Kelly's boot camp. Go on down the street to the Patrick Kelly.
Nobody wants to go to that.
I don't want to call it a reform school. That's not politically correct. I'm the most politically not correct politician you'll ever meet. But go on down to the school that a retired military drill sergeant is operating. Okay, loving guy, tough love. My way of thinking, all love can be tough. But you go down the street and put that child who needs structure, who needs discipline. I would think the Teachers Association would be shouting out to the rooftops, "Thank you, Jesus. We have an option for these kids." So I can go out and so I won't have to spend all my time dealing with one or two kids that are totally acting out, and my principal won't do anything.
Sure. Well, let me unpackage a few of those. On the issue of choice, our legislative agenda actually for years has advocated for choice. We believe in public school choice, that students should have access to a public school of their choice regardless of zip code. Because like you, we agree that every child should be able to access the educational environment that best meets their needs. But I guess the rub or the difference between our legislative agenda and what you're saying, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, are that private schools, by nature of being a private institution, and we do have private school teachers that are members, and we advocate for them, and we agree they deserve higher pay as well.
Yeah.
But as a private institution, they are enabled to and allowed under the First Amendment to deny access to students based on disability status, religion, race, and we don't think that that's actually choice.
Well, I don't know of any private school that can deny access based upon race. Name one.
They actually can, because they don't take federal dollars. They are not subject.
No, but that's Jim Crow. I mean, you know, a business, downtown business in Georgetown, South Carolina, cannot deny to serve a client based upon race.
Because they are a place of public accommodation under the Civil Rights Act. A school is not.
Okay, I just have never heard of a school. I think that would be. I think I would challenge that a school is going to deny access based upon race. I think that's a red herring, and I think it
What about disability status?
Well, I mean, certain private schools can have entrance exams. Okay. That's true. That's
but
true.
A public school cannot. Any child walks in the door.
Right. But let me just finish my statement. Let me be very clear. I'm not in favor of closing down public schools. I graduated from public school. I graduated from Richland Northeast High School in 1984.
I'm a Richland 2 teacher. Okay.
President of my senior class. You know, I love my alma mater. I'm a Cavalier through and through. But here's the point. Again, I go back to a holistic approach. We're not talking about closing down public schools, but to the contrary, what we're talking about is rewarding excellence. Let me give you an example. In Williamsburg County, at King Street High School, and it's very sad that you don't hear a lot of teachers groups talking about these numbers. It's sad that you have to really dig deep to get these numbers. And it's even sadder that you have to do a FOIA request to break it down by ethnicity. I'm still waiting on the Department of Education in Columbia to break it down by ethnicity without charging me hundreds of dollars to get something they should be tracking. That's a sidebar. Here's the point. At King Street High School, guess how many young males that start 9th grade do not graduate? Do not graduate.
Given the state high school graduation rate is under 90%, then I'm going to assume that it's significantly lower than that if you're bringing that data.
Yeah, it's the worst in the state. It's the worst public school in the state in terms of male graduation, not discounting some charter schools that have even worse numbers. And that's a whole nother discussion, but because I am for charter schools, but I'm not for different standards for charter schools. It seems to me some school districts and some educators want to make it harder to be a charter school than a public school. But here's the issue. Here's the number. 52% of those young males made in the image of God do not graduate. And my question for the voters, and my question for you guys is, what happens to them?
So
what happens?
That's a fair answer, because I agree. Each one of those young men deserve access to a world-class education.
But let me just finish. If you look at how much it costs to educate those young men, and here's where Teachers Associated really do themselves a disservice, because they don't want to talk about that money. If you want to act like a business, you got to talk like a business. Okay. You're talking about.
To be clear, I don't want to act like a business, because you talked about competition, which I served in the DeVos administration, so I know that argument. Competition to me implies winners and losers. I don't want winners and losers. I want every child. I want every child to win.
But that's socialist. See what you're talking about is be quite honest, be respectful. You're talking about Bernie Sanders socialism. You want to control the outcome. You want to control the outcome. See, I want to control the input And I want to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity. And here's the point.
Okay.
$17,000 per year is the pupil cost. I never hear a teachers association talking about that. $17,000 a year in Williamsburg County is the pupil cost per year. And what kind of bang for the buck are they getting? It's the taxpayers are losing. You know, we're talking about the losers, the taxpayers are, and the kids are losing. The kids are losing. And so the sweetheart, I'm on a Zoom right here. And so the cost, guess how much it costs the private school? Just as a data point.
Typical tuition will be somewhere in the ballpark of $7,000 to $8,000.
4,300 Williamsburg Academy. Check me on that. Around 4,500.
I have no reason not to.
And so you're talking about, and everybody in Williamsburg County agrees, those kids of all skin colors, of all ethnicities, are getting a higher level of education.
Could I ask you a question? Would they admit every child who applied to their school?
I would hope so, as long as they had the facilities. Here's the rub. They don't have the $17,000 a year to have the world-class handicap facilities. They're not able, they're getting $4,000 in change to academically educate children, and they're providing scholarships oftentimes. Instead of talking about the red herring of whether they turn down a kid, perhaps because they don't have a handicap rate, what you should be saying is, how come the public school is failing to educate when they're getting 4 times more money? That's the question.
Could I ask you another question? You did mention charter schools, and we have many charter school teachers that are members, and charter schools are public schools in South Carolina, accessible to all students. And you said that charters shouldn't be held to different standards than public schools.
Correct.
Agreed completely. Should private schools adhere to the same curriculum standards that South Carolina public schools are set to hold by action of the General Assembly?
All right, that's a fair question, and I would answer it like this. Since the Dewey Decimal System, since John Dewey, the father of modern education, right? Can we agree that he was one of the big wigs in public education back in the day?
Cannot disagree.
And one of his famous quotes that you don't hear a lot of teachers associations quoting is, number one, it's not so important to teach a child how to read. He actually said that the literacy of a child is really not that important. What is important is to get them indoctrinated into the system, to make them and he actually said this, it's important to pull them away from the influence of their family and their church. That's a direct quote from John Dewey. And what I'm suggesting to you,
you mentioned red herring. John Dewey is not the South Carolina General Assembly. And the South Carolina General Assembly has established through the Read to Succeed Act that every child must be literacy proficient by 3rd grade. So
but they're not.
Fair. But should private schools be held to the same standard if you're talking about accessibility for all students?
The way I'm going to answer your question is, it's a complicated question. It deserves a reasoned answer.
Fair enough. Yes, sir.
The reasoned answer is that the failure of the public school system to teach children literacy, and literacy rates have gone down, make no mistake about it. In South Carolina and America, we're talking about millions and millions of functionally illiterate adults that have a problem being able to perform on the job, and have a problem, quite honestly, getting a job because they're functionally illiterate. We're talking about millions. And so the standards that most private schools, and quite honestly, most church schools have, are higher. They're quite a bit higher than the average, than the lack of excellence that we have. And again, I'm a product of the public school system.
Fair. Could I ask what your source is that private schools have higher standards than public schools?
The source is private school kids are performing higher, and quite honestly, homeschool kids are performing higher on SATs, on ACTs. That's just a fact. That's just a data point that non-public school children are performing at a higher level.
Do you have, just to ask, because that's a fair point about SAT and ACT, do you have that data disaggregated by socioeconomic status? Since
there you go, but there you go. You're trying to make a direct correlation to a person's poverty or lack of economic status and education. I reject that notion because that's the Democrat playbook.
No, sir. I'm just asking because by College Board's own data, that is a significant factor.
What I would say to you is if a school system, which many school systems do, teach children that based upon their skin color and the socioeconomics, that they're victims, guess what? They're going to act like a victim. When you teach a child that because of a skin color, and let's talk about critical race theory, because it's not so much infected South Carolina yet, but it's infecting a lot of programs we see around the country where it actually teaches young children based upon their skin color to feel guilty because they have a certain skin color and their friend doesn't. There's one word to describe that: racist, evil. And so when children are raised in a system that is always talking about skin color and is always talking about ways that people are victims, they're going to naturally rise to that standard of victimhood. Ben Carson, Dr. Martin Luther King. We can go down the line of successful people that were born in very impoverished situations. Ben Carson's mother couldn't read, but yet she had him do, what's the number one predictor of success oftentimes in a child's home? Is how many books are in that home.
I've met Dr. Carson, and he shared that story. His mom actually fooled him into thinking that she could read so that he was doing his work. I've heard the story, yes.
So that's the type of stories that teachers should be talking about. They should be talking about the Bible. There's no constitutional right to tell, or constitutional prohibition to tell a teacher that she can't talk about her faith in the classroom. That's a violation of her First Amendment right. I would offer that if a teacher cannot, a public school teacher cannot go in the classroom and say, young people, let me tell you this: God is important in my life. And by the way, our national motto is "In God We Trust." Okay, if she can't go in and talk about how morality and faith and a person shouldn't lie, steal, or cheat, and they should wait to have sex until they get married. If she can't go in there and talk about it from a Judeo-Christian worldview, our founding fathers and mothers would be spinning in their graves. And then we wonder why so many kids are acting out. We wonder why 52% of the kids of the males of all skin colors are not graduating high school at King Street High School. And we wonder why there's a 25 to 20, sometimes up to 25% delta, Patrick, in the graduation rate between males and females. That is the civil rights issue of our time. I am running on the issue that the public school system needs reform from the bottom up, not the top down. It matters more what happens in your house and my house than the White House. It matters more what happens in the schoolhouse than the White House. And when we've got a 25% delta between male and female graduation in South Carolina in certain areas, nobody should be accepting that. And I know, and to your credit, I don't think you do. I can tell that troubles you. All I'm saying is, instead of talking about let's get teachers more money, let's talk about let the parents control the money. See, I think the money should follow the child, not the teacher. The money should follow the child, not the bureaucrat. The money should follow the parents, in some cases grandparents who are guardians. They should be the ones that say, you know what, I'm pulling my kid out of King Street. Why would any public school educator say a parent, a single parent especially, doesn't have a right to pull their child, their male child, out of a failing system that's been that way for years and years and years, generationally, and say, I want to take half of that money, half of that $17,000, and send that child to Williamsburg Academy. And oh, by the way, I want to put that child on the public school bus and drive that child to the private school. There is no prohibition. See, my opponent says the South Carolina Constitution denies that child that right. And he's wrong about that. Every time a judge at any level looks at, if the parent controls the money on the child's behalf, that is totally legal, that is totally moral, that is totally constitutional. What would be wrong is a legislator like me, I happen to go to a Baptist church, and what would be wrong is me to say, you know what, I just want to make the South Carolina education system totally Baptist. And you know what, we're just gonna ram the Baptist denomination on everybody's throats. That would be illegal. That would be moral on so many different levels. Nobody's arguing that. But what's not wrong is for a parent of any religion, perhaps the parent's an atheist, perhaps the parent's a Muslim, and let that parent decide to send that child to the school of their choice.
The state Supreme Court will certainly be addressing that issue tomorrow when they hear Governor McMaster's case.
It's decided in other states. It's already been decided. And I think the U.S. Supreme Court, if they took that case up, it'd be a no-brainer. Because we've seen what happens when you have and so what you're talking about is a monopoly. I mean, again, this sounds political, but it's business related. When you have a one-size-fits-all monopoly for the poorest of the poor, and they have no other choice to send their child to King Street. And many parents have no other choice because they can't afford the $4,000, and change to send it to Williamsburg County. So they're forced to send their child to a failing school. And you know as well as I do, Patrick, that certain districts in the state are terrible. The district that I'm talking about that got so bad, Molly Spearman, and I'm sure you've met her, had to physically come down and fire the superintendent of that school district and tell the school board in Williamsburg County School District that your services are no longer needed or required. So you've got an elected school board that's sitting there having meetings or not having meetings, and they have zero authority. The authority is coming all out of Columbia. Make no mistake about it. This is not a rural problem, as someone like that. This is not a funding problem, as my opponent would say. Williamsburg County is getting $17,000 a year. That's more than Georgetown County. I dare say it's probably more than Richland County.
I'm sure federal funds.
Right. So why would you, and I'm saying you rhetorically, why would anybody want to keep throwing good taxpayer money at a bad, failed system? That's the issue over there. It's a civil rights issue over there. And Williamsburg County is predominantly African American. When those African American males, and all males, can't even graduate and won't graduate, it's time to not blame it on the children. I believe those kids' lives matter. I believe teachers' lives matter. And I believe we got to take care of our teachers, but the way to do it is not through a socialistic one-size-fits-all monopoly. The way to do it is a rising tide lifts all boats. Competition works. For many years we had competition. Many years, Patrick, we had competition in public colleges. In other words, when you were ready to go to college, I used the GI Bill, by the way. When I was ready to go to college, I had a choice. I could go to a public school. I could go to a private school, and the GI Bill was my voucher.
Sure.
Why shouldn't a parent be given that same option? That's the issue of the day. Is our education system in District 32 that I'm running for, in many ways is a failure. We've got 42% of people on government assistance in certain pockets of the year. We have to do something for those beautiful families and help them lift their kids so it's not generational poverty. I'm trying to get people out of generational poverty. The Democrats want to keep people in Here's the question. Name one family that's been in generational welfare that a Democrat has helped get out, that a Democrat politician has helped get out. And I'll just ask that as a rhetorical way because I don't know that we're going to find a good answer. The education system in South Carolina needs to improve, and it's only going to improve. It's not going to reform from itself. And I'll say this, and I know we're getting short on time, and you probably didn't ask all your questions. I want to take it. If we have time, I want to take it. But why does the Teachers Association, Patrick, and I just wrote this note down. It's public information. The SCEA, I guess that stands for South Carolina Education Association.
Yes, sir.
Why in the world would they give $500 or more to my opponent when his county is the worst performing education county in the state? Why would they do that? Why would they throw their money at a candidate that's totally failed the kids?
I can't speak for another association, sir.
I understand that, but y'all are kind of cut from the same cloth, aren't you?
No, sir, we're not. But I would, to be fair to you, I don't want to turn this into a me and you conversation. This is to inform our members. And
right,
I make sure to inform, and I don't want to slant it with me, but I'd love to have this conversation offline.
Yeah, I understand.
I would love, just to be fair, to ask you a final question. You covered a lot of ground that I had as questions, and I appreciate you doing that. But one thing you mentioned earlier, the need for educational reform and quality schools that are necessary for the economic development of our state. And if elected to the General Assembly, education reform is sure to be a high priority on your agenda because the General Assembly has been addressing it the last 2 years. I know a big component of educational reform for you would be around school choice. But is there anything else that you would consider to be an essential component of an educational reform system that would meet the needs of our children and of our state's economy?
Well, and fair question. I think this is the bottom line. I look at families and individuals and God as the answer. I don't look to government as the answer. It's the famous words of Ronald Reagan. It's not the government that is the solution most of the time. Government is the problem most of the time. A lot of times there's overregulation, there's stifling rules. It ties teachers' hands behind their back. They can't deal with a disruptive student. So I'm interested in choice. I call it educational freedom. Give you an example. So 2 years ago, after the Broward County tragedy, the women's feminist movement decided they wanted to have a protest all throughout the country and have a walkout for I think it was 17 or 19 minutes or longer, based upon every single victim that was killed tragically.
Talking about
yes.
Okay. Yes.
And so when you so they thought, hey, it'd be a great idea for our kids, our K through 12 kids. I don't think went all the way down to kindergarten, but a lot of children walked out of class 2 years ago. No parental consent. They didn't even know what they were protesting, many of them. Guess what? If I'd have been in Richland too, in 1984, 82, guess where I would have, if my teacher said, hey, a feminist movement is having a protest and we're going to allow you to walk out of class, or we're advocating for you to walk out of class, what do you want to do? I'd see you later, teach. I mean, I'd say teach, but I'd be down at Burger King so fast to make your head spin. But here's the problem with that. The system, Patrick, and I think you would agree, has become politicized. Education in America at all levels has become politicized. That's just a fact. I could argue. I don't like to use the word argue, but I think I could prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. From the curriculum, from removing God, from not talking about the difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. You ask the average citizen, you ask the average student, what political party did Abraham Lincoln belong to? What are they going to say?
I'd be proud to tell you that each one of my AP government students could tell you the answer, but please continue.
But could they tell you could they tell you that over 100, almost 120 Democrats voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Could they tell you that?
They could tell you about the history of Southern Democrats and the realignment that occurred in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Yes, sir. I feel confident they could explain.
But I wouldn't call it a realignment. I disagree with that notion. I don't want to say revisionism, but it's close. Republican Party platform, Patrick, has not changed. Okay, it hasn't changed from Abraham Lincoln's day in terms of personal responsibility, in terms of freedom. The Democrat Party from day one, all the way through the 60s, has not been about personal responsibility. It's been about government top-down control. Martin Luther King, Republican. That comes from his family. Dr. Martin Luther King. I am just saying, most people have been lied to about American history. My opponent, this is what, and I won't close on this unless you want me to, but I will say, my opponent does not want American history taught. He voted against the, what do they call it? The Constitutional Heritage Act. He voted against which simply requires kids, to learn American history and the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and some talks about the Federalist Papers, because for conservatives like me, that's just a word that simply means I believe in what works historically. I believe it's important to learn history because we know history, we won't necessarily repeat it, hopefully. And also the famous quote is, when we don't learn our history, what happens? I was just talking about this the other day with my kids, is that if we lose our history, we lose our future. If we don't know that a lot of these things happening in the streets today has happened in the past. There's nothing new under the sun, but if we don't teach our kids that mob rule never works, that the mob always turns on itself, that if you think you have a Black Lives sticker in your car or on your place of business and you're going to pay the protection money, that just means the mob's going to come after you first. Of course, Black lives matter. Guess what? All lives matter. Guess what? Your life matters. My kid's life matters. The point I'm making is education has gotten so politicized. It does not teach true American history. It does not teach about Joseph Rainey, first African-American congressman born in Georgetown, South Carolina, the first African-American House of Representatives. They don't teach that in school here in Georgetown County. And so what I'm suggesting is, when you have these shootings and they try to get kids to walk out of class because of quote unquote gun violence. I know as a active duty, 23-year active duty military member, a gun does not create violence. Okay, if I put a gun on this table, it's not going to do anything to anybody. And so to fool these kids to think that they can walk out of class and the teachers and the school district support it without parental consent, that's wrong. Because I guarantee you would be the first one if I wanted to do a Second Amendment Day, if I wanted to do a pro-life day, if I wanted to do a Veterans Day, if I wanted to do a let's support our President Day, and let's do a march and let's walk around the school and hold up signs and walk out for a period of time. You would say, no, that's not right.
Sir,
So for people, you know,
I wanted to speak and that our members could be informed on you, but please don't assume what I would or would not do as a teacher unless you're willing to visit my classroom, because actually my classroom is a fundamentally different place than what you've described. And I think that you would find multiple classrooms around South Carolina are far different than what you're describing.
And I won't disagree, but I would say, did you push back? Did your members push back 2 years ago? That's the issue. If you didn't push back against this politicized walkout across the state, then you really don't have a leg to stand on, because that was total politics. That was total politics, total leftist Democrat Party politics. Because what we should be talking about, how do we stop violence in schools?
Well, sir, only because you asked, and again, I want this to be about members being informed about you and your positions and not about me. But since you asked about my classroom, since I'm an APUS government teacher, when that occurred, my students were given that period of time, and this was a school level decision by our principal, to allow students to have a moment of silence for that period of time to use as they saw fit. Nobody left campus. Nobody was allowed to go off campus. If a student wanted to stay in the room and do work, they could. If they wanted to pray, they could. If they wanted to gather with their friends in remembrance of the lives lost in Parkland, that they could. So again, I prefer that you not assume something about my classroom or the classroom of our members, but I would encourage you to visit classrooms, because
believe me, I have. There's two rules I have: don't assume and don't trust virtually anybody. But so what you've said to me gives me, renews a little bit of hope. But the bigger issue is, why was that quote unquote time period even recognized? That's the whole point. That I'm glad that
and again, I'll answer that, and then I want to let you close with closing thoughts, because our members don't deserve to hear what I think, because I'm not running for office. You're the one that's willing to serve the state by running for office. In our school, it was student initiated. The students went to the principal and asked if they could have a period of time in remembrance of the lives lost, because as a high school teacher, I can tell you that Parkland incident, as well as other tragic school shootings around the country, impacted our students greatly, because those are their peers. And in a social media world, it's far more relevant and present to them than Columbine was when I was a high school student.
And I was in Colorado and serving active duty when Columbine happened. But I would offer, and I would disagree, I would respectfully disagree. It wasn't student initiated. You might believe it was student initiated, but students were manipulated by the social media and by the women's Democrat feminist movement that started that. That was a concerted effort to disrupt schools. And my point is, if a student tries to initiate a pro-life walkout, if a student tries to initiate any other movement, I can guarantee you it's not going to get the same. The point is, there is a leftist bias.
I want to ask you your closing thoughts. I would encourage you to speak to any of my former students and ask if their opinion or viewpoints weren't supported, regardless of where it was.
But you're the exception to the rule. What I'm saying in Georgetown County is we had a large portion of students walking out. And it was clear they were walking out in protest of quote unquote gun violence. They were protesting the Trump administration, and they were protesting the Second Amendment. And what I'm suggesting to you is, this would have been a great opportunity, and you probably did it when I'm hearing you, to say, why did Parkland even happen? Let's look at the root cause. That Parkland happened because red flag after red flag after red flag, 20 red flags went up, and the school district ignored it. And the young male had a track record a mile long, and the Democrat elected sheriff ignored it. The Democrat elected school board ignored it. So what I'm saying is, instead of looking for red herrings to protest, yes, it's a tragedy, but the tragedy could have been prevented. That's not me just saying, that's the father of the victims. Those are the parents of the victims. They're upset. If we're going to march, let's march over something not based on a false premise. And that's what I get upset about is these liberal educators. And let's make no mistake about it. The education industry is what it is. It's the education industrial complex. It is totally taken over by, socialist agenda. Now, you are the exception, okay? And I applaud you for that. We should be teaching critical thinking skills. We should be teaching children, young men and women, how to become entrepreneurs. We should not be teaching children that you want to go to school and become a transgender studies, women's studies major. What are you going to do with that? Other than organize a women's march to have kids walk out of school. I mean, you know,
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, both feedback 2020 on a Zoom call. As I have for every individual that's spoken with us, I just want to make sure you and I have covered a ton of ground. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, but I've asked every individual that we've spoken with if there's any final closing thoughts that you want to share with our members, anything that you feel they need to know that we haven't covered.
Well, I think that thanks for offering and allowing me to speak. And I know that I'm probably not the typical politician, and I'm not politically correct, and I don't necessarily want to be, because I think that's the problem. Quite honestly, that's the problem with not only our education system, is that we're not teaching kids that America and South Carolina, with all of our wars and prior injustices that were mainly supported by the Democrats, with all of that, America is still the best country, the country that has the most opportunity. And I challenge any educator, any politician, any parent for that matter, to show me one other country, one other state for that matter, that has more equal opportunity for a young person to rise. In the famous words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we might have come over on different boats, right? But we're in the same boat now. Let's stop making everything about skin color. Let's teach kids the truth about America. Yes, did we have some issues? We had some major issues, but let's talk about why. And let's talk about who are the men and women that solved them. Those should be the heroes we talk about. But yet we stir up this racial division, and it's not healthy. Now, I'm not saying you do. All I'm saying is a young boy or young girl should not have to apologize for being an American in a South Carolina. No young boy or girl should be taught critical race theory, that they need to apologize for being born a certain skin color. And make no mistake about it, that type of nonsense is being taught. It's probably not being taught in your classroom. But until parents take charge of the educational industrial complex, and until parents are able to send their kids where they want them, the system will never reform. Williamsburg County will never produce a better system until there's competition. You and I have an honest disagreement about apparently you don't want competition in education. I do, because competition works. I'm a conservative because I look at history and I see what's worked in the past. Okay, there's places where we don't need competition, we don't need mercenaries, we don't need our military, we don't need military members going to we don't need to pay the highest bidder to the military. We can agree on that. But we do need competition in education, and we do need competition in industry, and we do need to applaud the free market economy. And until children understand the beautifulness of South Carolina and America, we're going to continue to have these issues. We're going to continue to have rioting in the streets. We're going to continue to have a lack of respect for our police. And the kids need to be taught data. They need to be taught that there is police brutality across the board, but they're not. You ask the average kid about police brutality, they're going to tell you a slanted, skewed story. They're not going to tell you. You ask the kid about homicides in America and South Carolina, broken down by gender, by ethnicity, they're not going to know. And so what I'm suggesting is we need to address the issues of the day, and our kids need to be informed on the issues of the day, because if they're not addressed, then you get kids that don't even know the capital of their own home state. They don't even know who Joseph Rainey is, the first African-American congressman born and raised in Georgetown. Well, he lived in Georgetown. He might have been born in Charleston. But the point is, that's my point, is we got to get back to the fundamentals and teach our kids, stop being ashamed of America and South Carolina. It doesn't work anymore. It's never worked. And we need to raise people up and talk about content of character, not color of skin.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to speak with us and inform our members. Thank you for your service to our country in the military and your willingness to serve the state as an elected official.
Thank you, Patrick. And I wish you the best. And I think what I would offer you is, if y'all are going to make an endorsement look at what the candidates represent. Look at their track record. My opponent has a horrendous track record when it comes to education. So for any organization that cares about kids and education, for them to throw good money at bad, I just don't get it. I just don't get it.
Well, we thank you for your time, sir.
All right. Take care. God bless.
You too.